Look, this is normally the day where we talk about all the big pop culture stories of the week, but this week there's really one big story. Jimmy Kimmel has been taken off the air indefinitely over comments that he made about the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Today, the rules around free speech in art and media are a bit in the air right now. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Let's just get into it right away. Alyssa Mercante is here. Jackson Weaver is here. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to have you here. Listen, before we begin, I just want to start off by saying we're talking on Friday morning. This is a moving story. It could change by the time that people hear this conversation. Just last night, President Trump dropped some new threats. He said, TV networks could have their licenses taken away for saying negative things about him. But if people have not been following the story, here's a really quick refresher to just bring you up to speed.
In America, we have a little something called the First Amendment. And let me tell you how it works. There's something called a talent-o-meter. It's a completely scientific instrument that is kept on the president's desk. And it tells the president when a performer's TQ, talent quotient, measured mostly by niceness to the president, goes below a certain level, at which point the FCC must be notified to threaten the acquisition prospects for billion-dollar mergers of network affiliates. These affiliates are then asked to give ultimatums to the even larger megacorporation that controls the flow of state-approved content, or the FCC can just choose to threaten those licenses directly. It's basic science.
That was Jon Stewart. He normally hosts The Daily Show on Mondays, but he swept in yesterday on a Thursday night to cover the story because the Jimmy Kimmel story has been covered last night by Stephen Colbert, Seth Meyers, Jimmy Fallon. They all weighed in. Alyssa, I'll start with you on this. There's a lot to unpack here, but let me just go back to your first initial gut reaction when you heard, Jimmy Kimmel is going to be taken off the air indefinitely.
I'd like to say I was surprised, but I wasn't surprised. I mean, we have kind of seen echoes or hints of this happening with Colbert. Trump has historically obsessed over his image on cable news networks. He gets frustrated at SNL. He obsessively watches television, and we've seen a huge push from right-wing talking heads and content creators towards trying to get people fired in the wake of the death of Charlie Kirk. And as someone who's been studying this for a few years now, I know that this is a president with very thin skin attempting to thicken that skin by removing anybody who says anything about him. And now he has even more control than he did during his first administration. And I think it's a lot easier for him to pull all of this off. So not surprising, sadly. That's
useful context, I think, like this idea of Trump using the FCC to sort of maybe muzzle networks. That's not a new idea. This is something that's been in the air for a minute. And the fact that this story is kind of coming out now, that might be why you're not surprised. Maybe it's useful to contextualize all of this in the very specific comments that Jimmy Kimmel made. So let's just hear the very specific thing that set off the powder keg earlier this week.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In between the finger pointing, there was grieving. On Friday, the White House flew the flags at half-staff, which got some criticism. But on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. May I ask, sir, personally, how are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. And it's going to be a beauty.
Yes. He's at the fourth stage of grief, construction.
So to me, Jackson, I hear that monologue, and for the most part, it does not stand out. It sort of sounds to me like regular run-of-the-mill Jimmy Kimmel. But there was that phrase that he said, characterize this kid as anything other than one of them. Like he's talking about the MAGA movement here. That seems to be the phrase that is most contentious. Give us a bit of a snapshot about how we went from this monologue to Jimmy Kimmel getting yanked off the air within 48 hours after that.
There's a whole lot of context to this. And I mean, before I start, I'm going to say I'm holding onto my mic, not because I'm so animated, but I'm having a few mic stand issues. But this issue is something that has elements that go from the world of entertainment to the world of politics. I mean, a little bit of more context. If we go earlier in this year, we saw Stephen Colbert getting canceled because of some comments he had about Donald Trump and a lawsuit that was settled with Paramount over an episode of 60 Minutes. That was happening in the ether when a merger with Paramount and Skydance was being discussed.
CBS says there's no relationship between the decision to turf Colbert's show and then that decision, but that is obviously, you don't have to believe CBS's statement. I'm just telling you what they say.
Exactly. And that's the reason that's a context maker for this decision is what ended up happening is Kimmel made that statement on a Monday about whether or not the alleged killer of Charlie Kirk was a left-wing or right-wing affiliated person. Tuesday, he kind of doubled down. We saw posts by Donald Trump being upset about that. The FCC chair, Brendan Carr, went on a podcast and had some vague kind of threats around what might happen to Disney, the parent company of ABC that has Kimmel's show on the air, will happen if they don't yank that show. He's not issuing clear directives. Donald Trump on Truth Social is not issuing clear directives, but these are kind of in the ether, while at the same time, some of the stations that run this show, the station owners, the Nexstar, a big company, Sinclair, a big company, do also have, either mergers that are potentially coming down the pipe that the White House needs to approve, like the Paramount Skydance thing, or Sinclair, they just want to change the regulation of how many stations a single network owner can own, which is a White House decided thing. And then what ends up happening is Nexstar says we're not going to put on the show on our stations anymore. And then ABC says we're preempting Kimmel's show, not giving a specific reason as to why, but preempting is kind of like a cancellation that happens just spur of the moment. A cancellation is a more like official thing that happens from different discussions. Preemption is like theoretically, if there was an earthquake or something, Family Guy would be taken off the air so they could run new stuff.
Right.
So it's the show's being preempted. ABC's not saying why. After that, Sinclair says, even if Kimmel gets back on the air, we're not going to run it anymore. Yeah. And the reason I started with the Colbert thing at the top is because it's a similar situation in that the FCC statements, a government body, and Donald Trump statements, president, are not declaratively, decisively, officially the reason that Kimmel is preempted.
Right.
But with these other mergers in the air, with these discussions about the future of how TV is being regulated, it's really, really going into it. And specifically about what Kimmel said, it doesn't necessarily seem super offensive to many people, but what he is entering into the debate is whether or not this alleged shooter was on the left or on the right, which is a huge bone of contention.
We still don't know.
Confusing.
Yeah.
It's so confusing for so many reasons I think we'll get into later on in this conversation. But just to like set the stage, it's a thing that cannot be decisively declared right or wrong right now. In his monologue as a comedian, you kind of expect them to just say the truth. They don't care what the bounds are and not necessarily even have to always be 100% truthful. He says his opinion that this guy is definitely on the right, and that makes a lot of people very upset because they think the exact opposite.
So I want to just contextualize some of the stuff that you said there, because you've talked about some of these smaller companies and maybe people are not familiar with them. There is a lot of mergers in the air right now that that the Trump government has to approve. Paramount Skydance, that's a merger that they have to approve. CBS is owned by those companies. That's the reason for that. That's a speculated reason for why CBS will take someone like Colbert off the air to sort of maybe please the Trump administration. This idea of these smaller companies that own a bunch of smaller stations, they preemptively say, you know what, we are going to do something that appeases the Trump administration in this particular moment, because they're also waiting for their merger to be approved. So there's a lot of like conversation about like money being one of the motivators, sort of swimming sort of in the air here. Alyssa, I want to play you a part of an interview that aired on CBC Toronto's Metro Morning. This is a University of Toronto professor, Jason Stanley. He's speaking about the big picture of what's happening in the United States right now.
Really, what has happened in the United States is Trump has taken control of all the independent levers of government, the supposedly independent levers of government. Legally, they're supposed to be independent, and he has instructed them to target his opponents. The United States government is on the midway point or early midway point towards a one-party state, a dictatorship, and it's increasingly out in the open. So we've got all the democratic institutions under siege. Every apparatus of the state is directed against anyone who would criticize Trump in democratic institutions, media, the courts, the universities. And we in Canada have to not neutralize this. We have to not paper this over. We have to not normalize it.
Alyssa, Dr. Stanley is not, mincing any words here. There, he says, the idea of the United States is in the midway point to being a one-party state. That's a significant kind of statement. When you hear that, how does that fit in with what's going on with the Federal Communications Commission, which is the FCC? That's the agency that regulates TV and radio and other media in the United States. How does that fit in with what's going on there?
Well, we have seen time and time again that Trump's appointees in various corners of the government are politically kind to him, friendly to him, in many ways financially motivated by joining the administration, and in a lot of other ways criminally unqualified. You look at Kash Patel, who's the first FBI director that's never been in the FBI in any way, shape, or form. And we know Carr and what he was looking to do even before he became the chair of the FCC. He was named to a Republican seat on the commission back in 2017. He wrote the FCC chapter for Project 2025, the playbook for Trump's big 2024 campaign. He said that the agency was censoring people and that the FCC should promote free speech, which is very interesting considering what just happened. We know that he's close friends with Elon Musk. We know that he, as soon as he stepped into the role, started launching investigations into diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and accusing ABC of, not using them correctly and that they had political biases. He complained when Trump was fact-checked during a debate. This is all very clear components of a state that is trying to silence critics in every way that it can by shoving anyone who is amenable to Trump and his ideas into every corner of the government.
My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. And today we are talking with Jackson Weaver and Alyssa Mercante. And normally we don't play this many clips, but there are so many actors and people involved in this story. And it's really useful to hear them in their own words. And I want to play you another clip. This is the FCC chair, the person you were just talking about, Alyssa, Brendan Carr, on CNBC, offering his take on the Kimmel suspension.
I think ever since President Trump won the election, it's created a permission structure for markets, including the media market, to rationalize. I mean, again, if you look at the ratings for late night television, they've been in an absolute nosedive for years. But for some reason, these companies felt like they had to continue to subsidize it. And I think that's ending. And again, I think your viewers get this, but think about the business side of this. You have the national programmers, Disney, that create this content, and you've got individualized licensed TV stations all across the country. And they're required, they've been for years, required to respond to the needs of their local communities and viewers. And I think it was those local communities and viewers that were saying, we don't like this stuff anymore.
So that's Brendan Carr on the of the FCC framing this whole Kimmel situation just as a business decision. That's sort of the context that he's sort of putting forth here. That just local network affiliates saying our people don't want this anymore. Alyssa, when you listen to him say that, what do you make of that?
I mean, I think it's convenient, and I think the Trump administration has been consistently painting itself as, an administration of a businessman, and Trump is not even all that successful of a businessman if you tear down everything that he's actually done. And he's very historically has gone into situations, whether it's with business or in politics, and firing people en masse, instating people who are friendly to the way that he believes, countersuing someone who's going to sue him in order to try and silence them. I think painting it as a business decision, when you look at something like what happened with Colbert, who was one of the best rated late night show hosts, we all know that it's kind of just BS. It all comes under the umbrella of silencing more critics as much as they can and as swiftly as possible. I mean, there are plenty of TV shows that struggle. Like Jackson was saying, you might eventually pull something off air and blame the ratings on it, but to preempt something, to unceremoniously yank it off air and then try and say that it was because of ratings, that is not really believable in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, two things can be true at once, right? Like the idea, is late night thriving? No, not necessarily. Is this the story right now? Do you have to buy the story? No, I'm not sure that you do. Look, this Kimmel suspension is maybe the most high-profile instance of a public figure facing these serious consequences
for speaking at all about the Charlie Kirk incident. But DC Comics canceled a series by writer Gretchen Felker Martin after she made social media posts that made light of his death. MSNBC commentator Matthew Dowd was let go after saying the quote was, "Hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which then lead to hateful action." And then Washington Post columnist Karen Attias says she was fired by the paper for simply posting some of Kirk's more controversial comments in his own words. Jackson, there are definitely some people who have maybe crossed the line when it comes to what they said or they've said publicly. But how are you feeling as you're watching all this happen kind of all at once?
It's definitely in my memory, recent memory. I was very young during 9/11, so I don't necessarily know what the climate.
You're young now,
was
pal.
then.
It's okay. That's not, that's a real thing. But anyways, continue.
But I mean, I don't have any frame of reference for this many firings, quote unquote, cancellations, removals, suspensions happening in such quick succession over a single event that so many people aren't directly connected to. There's, of course, Israel-Palestine been going on forever, and that's had, repercussions everywhere. The Black Lives Matter movement had repercussions, how people respond to that, etc. But the actual concrete consequences to so many various people, very, very disconnected from one another, happening in such quick succession is unparalleled, again, from my watching of media. I do think that it does play into a very violent shift that's happening when it comes to what is deemed permissible and what's not deemed permissible, what the schema of our acceptable communication is being changed into. I think that if you go to recent for over the jeans ad, the Sydney Sweeney jeans ad, I think that was another situation in which the actual issue at its heart, while it did speak to a lot of people, also became kind of a proximal way for people to fight and debate over which political lens is the one through which acceptable communication can be refracted through. This is another thing where people are definitely very upset, traumatized by so many people watching this murder happen on their screens. I don't even our Bud Dwyer, I know, was a politician that I think shot himself on live television. That was a hugely traumatic event. Of course, the JFK assassination, but those events are very few for the violence disseminated to so many people so immediately and so many, for a person that some people have a parasocial relationship with. And that is really definitely driving some of the reaction, a lot of the reaction to this. But it is also, I think, related to, what kind of idea and what kind of ideal is acceptable. And then also it's being so muddied by what we talked about off the top. The intractable question, was this alleged killer on the left, on the right? Is it even possible to say, given the way that politics work among Gen Z right now?
Well, I think that's a useful lens to look at, Alyssa, because I think I am exhausted by everything being a referendum, right? I'm exhausted by the idea that, genes are a referendum the same way that hey, did that brand of candy post about Black Lives Matter being a referendum? Not everything is a referendum, right? And then suddenly social media sort of urges us to say, hey, if that thing is not brand aligned, then we should be sort of specifically fighting against it. And then onto all of that sort of powder keg comes the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I think Charlie Kirk's story maybe takes it to another level, because if people outside of conservative circles were maybe not familiar with Charlie Kirk up until last week, how did Charlie Kirk become the rallying point for conservatives right now? How does this story more of a referendum than anything else that we've seen maybe in the last year or so?
Yeah, I mean, Kirk is, prior to his assassination, was kind of representative of the silk glove over the iron fist of fascism. He was, conservatives and liberals liked to paint him as, upstanding gentleman who just wanted to debate people in the marketplace of ideas and have a respectful conversation. But even Ezra Klein's piece about Kirk's legacy didn't use Kirk's own words, because the facts are that Kirk's language was often inflammatory.
You're talking about a piece that, for context, the headline of that piece was Charlie Kirk did politics the right way. That was the headline of that piece. Yeah. Yes.
And his words did hand wave away gun deaths for the sake of maintaining the Second Amendment. It did demonize, Black people, immigrants, trans folks regularly. And the convenient framing of he was just a kind gentleman who was definitely 100% killed in a manner that is horrific and should not happen. I'm a person who believes no one should die due to gun deaths anywhere, and no one should be murdered at all for any reason. But the idea that this was perpetuated by quote unquote a left-leaning person because, and we have seen people like Trump, like Musk, say that the left is inherently more violent when there is reams of proof that politically motivated assassinations and violence are predominantly imparted by people on the right wing. This was just the easiest thing to turn around and use. And I think also Trump got so angry at Kimmel because there was not about the political motivations of the assassin, which again, like we said, it's very difficult to parse. You have to be pretty well versed in internet language to even understand some of the things that Tyler Robinson was suggesting with the bullet casings and the etchings on them, allegedly. But Trump was definitely upset by Kimmel's suggestion that he was not all that bothered by what happened because, you know, we did see that he was at Yankee Stadium the next day dancing in the stands. And obviously when asked about Kirk, he immediately pivoted to talking about construction on the White House. So I think the unfortunate reality is there's already incredibly inflammatory rhetoric on the internet. And this was a powder keg that had a person who has long been considered just a debater, but who couches a lot of his language in inflammatory content, dying in an absolutely horrible way, and in a way that many people had to see on their front page on Twitter, which is very, very, very difficult to kind of wrap your head around.
Yeah, so there's a lot of sort of careless sharing of the clip of the assassination that I think, like, to me, that's social media at its worst. The idea, like, here, this news story broke. That's what I'm grateful for news organizations for. They sort of have the judgment to say, you don't need to see it. It's an incredibly graphic death, but also we can, social media doesn't have that filter, doesn't have that restraint. And of course, that adds to the emotional powder keg that is sort of ongoing. We're going to have more to talk about. I don't think we're going to sort of wrap all of this by the end of the show. So we're going to go a little bit past the radio deadline. But in the meantime, Jackson, I want to ask you about the idea that Jimmy Kimmel becomes the sort of figure of the resistance is a bit of a laughable joke to me. I mean, like, Jimmy Kimmel is not a particularly resistant person. You know, like, he's not he makes political jokes, but I don't think anyone would look at Kimmel and go like, that guy, he is absolutely the representative of how to stand up to a government. The same deal. I would say, like, the idea that, like, this year has made Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel figures of, like, radical politics is a bit of a surprise, right? So, like, how do we find Jimmy Kimmel in this spot? Does he normally occupy this kind of role at all?
No, I mean, his trajectory is one that is from very unbelievable. If you were to tell 1999 Jimmy Kimmel you're going to be the symbol of the left-wing resistance,
when he was hosting the Man Show?
I'm on the Man Show. Yeah.
Didn't he do blackface that he had to apologize for? Like, this is wild.
He had to apologize for a lot of the Man Show. So 100%. Yes. So I don't even know if that particular apology came because there have been so many other things to apologize for. So it's just a bit of a surprise to see him become this kind of central figure, no?
Yeah, no, he apologized for blackface in 2020, and 21 years before that, he was getting scantily clad women to bounce on trampolines and getting, like, children to sell beer to people in the street. And I remember watching Spike TV as, like, a 7-year-old being like, this shouldn't be on TV. And his trajectory has definitely went very, very, he went from that, which was not where he is now, and then he was a host of award shows and being a very kind of tame award show host for the Oscars. And then I think it's right at the kind of beginning of Trump's election second time, which very not long ago. It seems like it was a while ago, not that long ago. He had an opening monologue in which he said he was on Trump's list of enemies. He said it was a terrible night for women, for children, for the hundreds of thousands of hardworking immigrants who make this country go, for healthcare, for our climate, for science, for journalism, for justice, for free speech. So he had a whole diatribe there. And before that, he had spoken a little bit about being against Trump, etc. But I think that's when he kind of positioned himself as being a symbol symbol, not a symbol of the resistance, but like
Yeah.
on that side of things. And this
Yeah.
now, it's just like emblematic in so many people's minds about like the Writers Guild of America just released a statement saying that this is an attack on freedom of speech. Elizabeth Warren saying this is like a shoddy thing about government. So that's kind of, he's now a figurehead of that moment.
So let me just pause you there. We are speaking with Alyssa Mercante and Jackson Weaver, and we're talking with the Jimmy Kimmel being pulled off the air. We're going to say goodbye to our radio audiences right now, but if you want the rest of this conversation, you can find it on YouTube. You can find it on our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcast. In the meantime, my name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion, and hey, we will absolutely see you again next week. Okay, Alyssa, let me pick it up exactly from where we were just there. Like, for the people who support the decision to shut down Kimmel, they're saying this is no different than, Roseanne Barr having her show canceled in 2018 for those racist tweets about Obama advisor Valerie Jarrett, or Shane Gillis losing his SNL casting job after he was kind of called out for mocking Asian people on a podcast. Like those people, Kimmel sort of made a comment that upset a bunch of people, and then his employers are responding accordingly. That's the argument that they make. Do you see an equivalency between Jimmy Kimmel and those other people who have faced the consequences to things that they've said publicly?
I mean, first of all, just on its face, it's very interesting to try and compare racist, jokes and racism to somebody saying something that might have upset someone because of a potential political allegiance of someone that we still don't know. I think that's two very different things to fire people over. But then you also look at there's two prongs to this. I think number one, you have to look at how much more power the right has right now, and how much more louder these voices are on certain spaces on the internet, because it's not just people like Kimmel losing their jobs. It's professors, it's people who work in the video game industry, it's teachers. There are people who they've made an entire website dedicated to tracking people who have tweeted or put TikToks up that were either, in some cases, very, very poor taste about Kirk's death, or in other cases, just like others, pointing out what his words were like when he was alive and what kind of man he was like when he was alive. And those people have lost their jobs. So I think that is far different from when, the left was imparting cancel culture. But then I think it's also really interesting to look at how for so long the right positioned itself as the sort of F your feelings party, as the party of free speech, who has, railed against cancel culture. You saw Barstool Sports' Dave Portnoy saying something about what happened to Kimmel and that this is what he was deserved. Dave Portnoy made his career off of being a rude jerk to people, and he's a millionaire for it. Barstool Sports is an entire media conglomerate around bro culture, around, pushing the boundaries of what is acceptable behavior in a public space. I think, somebody like Kimmel, he obviously has a lot of power in terms of money, but in terms of the actual umbrella of these corporations, he has none. And I think it's also really interesting because, as we've said, what Kimmel said, he's on late night. That is a very neutered version of comedy. Right. That is not, the edgy comedy that I thought the right wanted us to come back to for so long. That was a very, very, very kind of soft kid gloves jab at the president. So I just think it's not even remotely similar. And I think when we're seeing it as wide reaching as it is, I think you're getting closer to McCarthyism than you are, this is cancel culture. I think you're seeing Carr say, we're not done, which means this is something that they're going to keep trying to do. And I think that's way different than, a few one-off people who were openly racist losing their jobs a few years ago.
I'll tell you this, when you read the history books about McCarthyism, you go like, this can't stand. People will be out in the streets. And then you kind of like live through a moment that is a facsimile of that and kind of go like, no, actually, it turns out not necessarily the case. On a related note, Roseanne Barr responded to Kimmel's firing by posting a sarcastic message on X.com. She wrote, "Imagine an administration putting pressure on a television channel to fire a comedian they didn't like. It is worth reminding everyone that when Roseanne's show was canceled, Donald Trump was president." That was 2018. I want to read something that the comedian Mike Birbiglia posted on Instagram yesterday, Jackson. He said, "If you're a comedian and you don't call out the insanity of pulling Kimmel off the air, don't bother spouting off about free speech anymore." What other responses are we seeing from the universe of comedy?
I mean, we are seeing other late night shows talk about this. We're seeing, we had off the top the the Jon Stewart monologue. His show was a facsimile of what you might see from North Korea, making a blatant statement about how he is the marching in line, that we're all happy here, and when the audience lashes like, shut up guys, we're getting in trouble. And then we see more, I think, gravitas in the response, maybe from like Seth Meyers, from Jimmy Fallon, even Stephen Colbert is kind of walking the line between like funny, haha, and this is a very, very dark time.
This is a situation you put us in, is you say the word gravitas and Jimmy Fallon in the same sentence. Like, up is down. Like, we're in completely uncharted territory here.
The world turned upside down, to quote Hamilton here. So we're seeing that, but also, I mean, as we mentioned, we are seeing comedians say like Dave Portnoy, or we're seeing Jeff Dyer, I think it is, saying that like, where were you when Roseanne was canceled? Where were you, XYZ? These other right-wing comedians were canceled, and we have mentioned it already, but I think it is required. We should mention that like the talk show ratings objectively are down. This is not something that
That's a real thing.
I think should be glossed over. I think the only late night talk show that had an improvement of ratings from like quarter 1 to quarter 2 this year was Colbert, and it was 1%. And the actual place that advertisers are really looking is the 18 to 49-year-old demographic. They're all abysmal there, and Kimmel was actually the highest, and it wasn't very high. So we are seeing other comedians saying like, hey, look, this is like not where people are going for their comedy. This is not what people care about. But yeah, I would say, I think on the whole, largely, it has been a this is not a good thing, and we should watch out for what the future holds for the rest of us. But again, like, there are those who are saying, well, like, this is just cancel culture that others have been promoting in the past, and why aren't you where were you when this happened to Roseanne? And we're not going to be sad that this happened to Kimmel, because you weren't sad when it happened to Roseanne.
Right. I mean, I will say that in the spirit of this, I think the best tweet that I've seen has been like someone who tweeted, this comment about saying, it's really what heartens me is trying to imagine the writer's room of John Oliver trying to figure out how much jail time they want to serve for the next episode, because there is something to be said about these late night shows. They may not have the audiences. I think they have the capacity. I think they have the firing squad, if you will, the ability to sort of say, like, we are willing to push the envelope when it comes to comedy, especially John Oliver. I think has been willing to sort of be very critical and at the same time be very direct. And that has been something that I've welcomed, whether it has the audience or not, the content is there. And I think the content has been delivering. Alyssa, Jackson and I have the luxury of being in Canada. And, to a certain extent, we kind of go, we're not as worried about free speech around here. That's maybe at a certain point we should be. But right now we're fine. As scary as things look for people in the media right now, where do you see free expression going in this current media landscape in the United States?
Well, first, I want to say really quickly, like what you were saying about these late night hosts having a chance and an opportunity and a team to really like kind of go at it. And they may not have the ratings. One thing that I think we don't think or talk about is that they also get a lot of views on TikTok and YouTube. And I've seen a lot of, clips from Fallon, from Kimmel, from Seth Meyers that get millions of views on TikTok. So that is also another arm of them reaching an audience that's not in a traditional, media Nielsen ratings landscape, that I think removing them from the air and then removing those clips, so the ability to make new ones, that's an important thing to point out. But leaning into this idea of them maybe continuing to do this kind of work. I mean, I don't know if someone wants to call up Kimmel and show him how to use TikTok and he can keep doing his show from that. Let's pivot to a Twitch live stream. Yeah. But I think we have to start thinking about, new ways to get voices out there. Maybe that means new media organizations cropping up in this space, or organizations being more bold. We need more voices like Ta-Nehisi Coates' recent piece in Vanity Fair. You need more voices on television like that. You need more people who understand these weird corners of the internet where this young alleged shooter came from, that makes it difficult for your typical mainstream news outlets to pinpoint his ideologies. And then in that gap, allows, right-wing thought provokers to suggest that they were left-leaning or at some point that they were trans, because nobody understands that every single thing that was written on those bullet casings were memes. And that is difficult to parse, ideology for a, not to be ageist, but a 60-year-old news commentator. That is something that is like a different language to them. So I think we need to have people who understand the internet in these spaces more. And we also need to have people understanding that there's pockets and corners of the internet that are getting further radicalized, that the Trump administration leaned into. Steve Bannon purposefully leaned into this during Trump's first campaign.
It was explicitly
and his
said.
administration
That was like an
explicitly said that he wanted to turn these unmoored young men towards something. They were directionless, and he gave them Trump. And it is scary. People do kind of feel like there's no way to make a big difference, but we also have to remember something. And I think if we remember this, this will help. I firmly believe, and other people firmly believe, that this behavior is a marker of the death throes of Trumpism and the Trump administration. He is not a popular president. When you remove the internet conversations, and we know that major social media platforms have aggressively shifted to the right in favor of, having Trump on their side. All of the heads of social media platforms were at his inauguration. And now it's much harder to get racism removed off of Twitter. It just lives there and exists there. I think if we remember that in the regular corners of America, people do not like this president. They do not like his administration, the things that they have done to this country. If we can get more grassroots organization and remind people of that, I think we can turn the tide, because the whole point of what they are doing is to go, hey, look over here. Right? We're not talking about whether or not Trump was in the Epstein files because of everything that's been going on for the last 2 weeks. And part of how fascism or, any other form of a government that isn't democratic and for the people, part of how it grows and how it takes over is by ensuring that the people are consistently at odds with each other. If we can all understand that the majority of Americans want a livable wage, and they want to be able to afford to live, and they want to be able to send their kids to school, and they want to be able to go to the hospital, and they want to be able to do all of these things that are anyone's inalienable right, that the way that this administration is going and the way that this country is going is not right. And I think if we can make that very clear, that this ideology is actually in the minority, they just hold the most power right now, I think that could make a big difference. But that's something that we got to work for. And we really got to get on the ground and start doing it, because we're all kind of just paying attention to Kimmel and cancellation. And we're not paying attention to the fact that they're still grabbing people off the streets with masked police officers and dragging them away to who knows where. And I think we have to remember that.
Alyssa, you said a lot of really important points there. And I just want to also just pick one specific point up, which is Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a piece for Vanity Fair. Do you know what it takes for Ta-Nehisi Coates to get back in the kitchen again? I mean, that man was like, I'm going to write my books. I'm going to write my comics. I'm going to be out for a minute, and then this story happens. Jimmy Kimmel gets pulled off the air. The whole sort of trajectory of free speech conversation the last week or so goes in a certain direction, so much so that America's greatest living writer at the moment is like, let me in there because I got some things to say. So yeah, that's him. That's him cracking his fingers and being like, okay, all right, I cannot sit on the sidelines any longer. I appreciate your time, both of you. You guys have been brilliant. I really appreciate it. Thank you again so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. Alyssa Mercante is an internet culture journalist in New York. Jackson Weaver is a senior writer at CBC Entertainment in Toronto. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We'll be back on Monday. We'd love to see you then.